I love my mother. Not in a creepy way. I love my mother. My mother loves me. It's an automatic thing, really, you know. You're born. Here's Johnny. And you have your little umbilical cord. Howdy, howdy, howdy. The doctors and nurses, they pick you up, they look at you, and they say to themselves, ew. Because face it, you know, when you're a baby, you look like a big prune with arms and legs. But what does your mother say? Your mother says, oh, that's my baby. Let me hold my baby. I love my baby. Because your mother loves you, you love your mother. But I always tell kids that something's going to change. One day, you know, 11, 12 years old, you're going to come downstairs. Your mother's going to be making breakfast, maybe scrambled eggs or something. You know, stand by the stove, a couple curlers hanging off her hair. Have one big terry cloth robe that's sort of threadbare. She's got those slippers that look like somebody stepped into the back end of a rabbit. She's going to be listening to her favorite CD, REO Speedwagon. You're going to say to yourself, oh my gosh, my mother is a geek. She's a nerd. She's a dweeb. But that's not the truth. You see, your mother just likes different things than you do, and that's okay. That's all right. This happened to me when I was about 13 years old. I didn't start out as an actor. I have to admit this evening. I started out as, well, I was 9 years old. I was watching television, and the Sesame Street started. And I saw Sesame Street. I saw Kermit the Frog. I saw Cookie Monster. Yeah! I said, Grover! And I thought to myself, I want to do that. And so I went home and I found my grandmother. My grandmother, she had a sewing machine. She taught me how to use a sewing machine. And I started making all these puppets. And by the time I was 12 years old, I had like 45 different puppets. I had this awesome puppet you could get inside of it. It was a huge monster, and its head was way up here. Yeah, I could make it talk. It was fantastic. And from the time I was 12 to like 16, I had traveled from California to New York doing puppet shows using Muppet kind of puppets, telling Bible stories or telling fairy tales at churches and civic organizations and Cub Scout troops. It was fantastic. Yeah! I was a puppeteer. Whoa! How you doing, baby? I'm a puppeteer. And the girl's going, oh, look, a geek with a sock on his hand. And in fact, let me just, you know, this is something, I've had this since I was about 12 years old, and I have not, honestly, I have opened this twice. So let me show you. I made this when I was 11. So that was 42 years ago. And honestly, I have not had this on in a very long time. It's not that easy being green. Having to spend each day the color of the leaves. When I think it could be much nicer being red or yellow or gold or something much more colorful like that. It's awesome, isn't it? I'm a big man with a doll. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was cool, you know? I'm a puppeteer. The thing is, you're trying to be cool, you're trying to get the girls to like you and everything, and, sorry, Kermit, get there. Let me out! Okay. And the thing is, you know, it's not that cool because the only way we could get around to do any of our programs is if my mother drove us there. And that's not cool. It's just not cool. It was 1973. Nixon was still president. Crocodile Rock was on the radio. Yeah. And we were doing a vacation Bible school in Avalon, Pennsylvania, at the First Presbyterian Church, which is now an antiques mall. And I remember we would do the Vacation Bible School in the morning, and at noon, once they let all the kids go from the Vacation Bible School, we would have to sit and wait for my mom to pick us up. And it was a hot week. It was one of those weeks that it was just burning hot. And this was an old stone church, and it had stone steps down the front, and you couldn't just sit down on the stone steps because they'd been soaking in the sun all day. You just had to sort of go down slowly in it, you know, it's like, Because if you go too fast, you'll get a rump roast, and who needs that problem? So, and we sat there waiting for my mother to come pick us up, you know? We watched the cars go by. Look, 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 look. Camaro. Yeah. We watched the girls go by. Hey, I'm a puppeteer. Okay. When all of a sudden we heard a sound coming down the street. Wow! It was a motorcycle gang. We'd never seen a motorcycle gang before. Guys on huge Harley-Davidson motorcycles painted black with a gold eagle imprinted on the side and had big silver bars, and guys with those hats with a pointy thing off the top and leather and chains, and we all looked at each other and we said, cool. But the excitement was over. So we sat down again. Oh. We watched the cars go by. Look, 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 look. Camaro. Yeah. We watched the girls go by. When all of a sudden we heard a sound coming down the road. Sounds like a bad Japanese movie, doesn't it? Look like a and it was the same motorcycle gang. We all looked at each other and we said, cool. Look, 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 El Camino. Yeah. It was the same motorcycle gang, and my friend Rick he stood up, he pointed at the motorcycle gang and he said, are you guys lost? And we laughed. Because junior high boys, man, they'll laugh at dirt. The motorcycle gang, they were not laughing. They looked rather upset. They waved at us, but they only used specific fingers. Just then, my mother drove up. Thank you, God. My mother at that time was driving a 1970 blue Dodge Dart. The Dodge Dart was a car created by the Chrysler Corporation for one reason and one reason only: to rust. You would buy a Dodge Dart, you'd pull off the lot, and immediately you'd hear the thing start to rust to pieces, right? The first thing that comes off are the struts that hold the back fenders off. Those things are flat. Like for 2 weeks after you bought the thing. And the fenders don't fall off, but if you hit the wind just right, the fenders go. And then the A-frames that hold the wheels on, those things begin to rust off, and they don't fall off. Your wheels just start to do this, like this, which looks fine from the side of the car, but when you're in the car, it feels like this. And then there were like rusty bits all over the car, and my dad, he would just slop auto body fill on it, you know. Which it just looked like some giant bird had had an accident on my mom's car. So, you have to know how my mom drives too. She drove in a very specific way. She learned to drive very late in life, and she had like 34 children, and so she was nervous about driving, right? And so, you know, normally you sit down on the seat and you hold the steering wheel in the 10 and 2 or 9 and 3 position and you drive, right? But my mother, she would pull herself up to the steering wheel. She looked like a vulture, that's what she looked like. Looking for roadkill. And then she would use both feet on the pedals. Oh dear children, when you do drive, do not use both feet on the pedals, because when you stop, when you put 2 feet on the brake pedal, you are gonna stop. And the kids fly over the seats into the windshield, brains, it's terrible. Oh, because we did have, you had seatbelts in 1970, right? But about a week after you bought the Dodge Dart, the seatbelts would get sucked down that crack in the seat. And you could put your hand down that crack, but you know you're gonna get a handful of hairy Fruit Loops, and who needs that problem? So my mother pulled up, she stopped her car, we piled in. And my mother began to drive down the road. And she did what every parent does to every child that they haven't seen for a while. Every one of you people have done this. You don't see your kid for a while, you're interested, you want to know how their day is gone, and so you say, how was your day? And let's take it full circle now. The girls will go, whatever. And the boys will go, because they're sick of hearing it. So then my mother, driving down the road, she did something she hardly ever did, because when you drive like a vulture, it's hard to see in the rear view mirror. My mother looked into the rear view mirror and she said, well, will you look at that? There's a motorcycle gang behind us. We began to sink down into our seats because we knew that death was mere feet behind us. My mother said, do you know anything about this? We said, no. My friend Rick Weiss, he gathered up all his consonants. He said, Mrs. Hartman, could we please pull down this one road? He thinks we're going to get away from the motorcycle in a 1970 blue Dodge Dart with the fenders holding us back in the wind. My mother pulled the car down. The motorcycle gang, they overtook us. They stopped the motorcycles in front of us. They stopped the motorcycles behind us. My mother stopped the car. Brains. And the man who was the leader of the motorcycle gang, he kicked down his kickstand and he stood up. And he began to walk towards the car, and I'm telling you, this is the biggest human being I have ever seen. He was a huge leather-clad refrigerator with a head on it. He was also the hairiest man that God has ever made. He had hair up and down his arms, and hair on the back of his hands, and hair on individual knuckles. He had an eyebrow that started right about here and went, wow, all the way around his head. He had a beard that started right under his eyes and wow! He had a tuft of hair growing out of the top of his shirt. It was like he had a pet ferret down there or something. And as he's walking, every once in a while it wiggles. And he's walking towards the car, and you can see under the matted hair of his arm there's a huge heart. It's beautiful. It's a tattoo of a heart, and it has the scrolled word across it, Mother. It's beautiful. It also has a dagger through it. And he's walking towards the car, and my mother lifted up her hand. She grabbed the handle. She began to turn down the... I know they have buttons for that now. She began to turn down the window, and we said, woman, what are you doing? And my mother said, oh, it'll be okay, don't worry. So she turned down the window, and the man with the big wow and the... He begins to describe to my mother in great detail the things that he was going to do to us, how she must leave us out of the car so that he can kill us. And my mother, the whole time, still sitting there, holding onto the steering wheel, listening to every word. And when he was done speaking, my mother's head turned. And she looked at the motorcycles in front of her car. And my mother's head began to tilt down. And her eyebrows began to arch over her eyes, and the corners of her mouth went down to a grimace. And my mother used a different voice that day. Yeah, parents have different voices for different things, right? You know, if your mother answers the phone, it's, hello, Hartman's. But if you happen to be like making too much noise in the background, the TV's on too loud, or you're wrestling with your brother, you say, hello, will you kids shut up back there? I will knock your heads off! Hello? I have not heard that voice since, and I pray to God I never hear that voice again. When my mother said, not unlike Clint Eastwood himself, move the bikes. I'll run them over. The big man with the wow and the He looked at my mother and he said, okay. The motorcycle gang got back on their motorcycles and they drove away, and I love my mother. That's the end of that story.